I'm Terry. I write under the name of Therese Purkis. I do contemporary romance and whatever I fancy doing at the time. So I'll be reading from my book, which is coming out on Tuesday. Woo! Yeah. And so I'll be reading from, it's called Never Again. It's the second book, which features the Perfect Blend Coffee House on the Gloucester Road in Bristol. And it features someone which I introduced in the first book, and it is her story. And it's a healing journey for her. So it's called Never Again. Prologue, 22 years earlier. Bren waited to enter the classroom at the start of the new school year. She was starting year 10 and was looking forward to the subject choices she had made. She hoped that the unwanted attention would finally go elsewhere. But hoping was just a dream as she looked down at her uniform. She wore last year's school blouse, more grey than white due to a mishap with the washing machine. The colour contrasted greatly with the crisp white material of the other pupils surrounding her. The buttons strained against her developing breast, the collar and cuffs frayed through continual wear. At 14, she was acutely aware that she was different to the rest of the girls in her class. The summer holidays being a welcome respite from the continual harassment she received from the popular crowd, who took great delight in commenting on her hair, clothes, and general demeanour. She tried to hide away, lurking on the outside to the thronging mass, and knew to keep her mouth shut if she was to last the lesson, let alone the day. Despite all her attempts to merge into the background, the bullying had started virtually straight away. She could hear the comments, could see both pity and glee in the eyes of her tormentors, knowing they had a ready-made victim waiting. She steeled herself, ready for the mental onslaught of jibes that would be coming her way when the teachers weren't around to keep it in check. The class was ushered into the room, and Bren was thankful that the seat next to her remained empty. She took out the French textbook and opened it to the page indicated on the whiteboard. She finished writing the title, date, and objectives of the lesson. She placed the pen on the table and waited. The classroom door reopened, and the head of year escorted a new girl into the room. The head of year spoke quickly to the French teacher and left. Bren looked at the girl standing at the front of the class. She has short, spiky hair, and a barely perceptible streak of burgundy in it caught the light. She wore the school uniform as a challenge, with Doc Martens on her feet, skinny black trousers, and a blouse undone more than the regulatory 2 buttons covering a black t-shirt underneath. Bren wished she had the girl's confidence as she stood with her hands on her hips. The girl eyed the other students, daring anyone even to look at her funny, let alone comment. Bren noticed the French teacher pointed at the spare chair next to her, and Bren allowed a quiet groan to escape. As the girl pulled out the chair, Bren overcome her reticence and welcomed. "Hi, I'm Bren." "Rachel," was the curt reply, but straight away the girl gave her a winsome smile. A sense of awkwardness overshadowed them as shyness took over. They worked through the lesson with barely a word spoken. "Where's your next lesson to?" Bren asked as they were packing away their books. Rachel got out a timetable and handed it to Bren. "Would you like me to take you there?" Bren asked, then expecting rejection continued. "Or you could ask someone else." "I'd be honoured if you would show me," Rachel said. The easy smile pulled Bren in. Gradually, over the next few lessons, an understanding developed, and the closeness that was to grow between the 2 girls started to emerge. A couple of weeks later, Bren found 2 brand new school blouses on the doormat of her house. Of course, Rachel firmly denied all knowledge. but her eyes smiled the truth, and during moments between her lessons, Rachel stood beside her, making sure the constant bullying all but disappeared. And for the first time since her mum had left, Bren didn't feel so alone. Chapter 1, present day. Bren pushed open the door to the Perfect Blend coffee house, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Bren was petite, with her straight brown hair tied back in a ponytail, a thinner top over a fuller bottom. Her lips were ready to spring forth with an honest smile. Her brown eyes, which held a million hues, always depicted a snapshot of her emotions. She smiled at the woman behind the counter. Rachel pulled down a mug and asked her friend, "The usual?" "Yes, please. And may I have a Danish bun, please?" Bren asked as she shrugged out of her damp coat, relieved that her stutter felt under control. "Certainly," Rachel replied. "Get yourself set up and I'll bring it over." Bren draped her coat over the back of her seat and pulled out a laptop. She placed the bag on the floor, with it leaning against the table leg. "We missed you yesterday. Georgina wanted to know if you were in," Rachel asked her old school friend as she placed the bun in the coffee on the table. She smiled. "Thanks, Rachel. I bet she wanted to speak to me about Tuesday. Did you do anything nice on your day off?" "Had some errands to run, which seemed to take up most of the day," Bren sighed as her nose scrunched up in annoyance. "At least they are done with, and I can concentrate on my writing today. Well, I hope they are out of the way." Bren pulled her bottom lip between her teeth. Rachel smiled at her friend and noticed the unconscious habit. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Rachel urged as she sat down next to Bren. Bren had razor-sharp instincts. She felt emotions deeply and hurt very quickly. But Bren would never reveal her true feelings, preferring to bear the burden on her own with a smile. Yet she would always be the first to help when asked. "Not really," Bren replied to her friend. She knew she could open up to her, but her embarrassment overrode the need to unburden. "Dad stuff." Nodding, Rachel reached across, patted her friend's hand, and quickly changed the subject with, "How's the story going?" "Almost there with the next draft." A smile creased her face in pleasure, portraying a glow of happiness. "Some of my beta readers have advised certain changes, so I'll be working on those today." The doorbell dinged and Georgina, the co-owner of the Perfect Blend, walked in. She nodded and smiled at the different customers. "If you need anything else, give me a shout," Rachel said as she poised herself into a standing position. "Will do." Bren studied Rachel's retreating back. Rachel's blonde hair was cropped short at the sides and flopped forward on top. Her very expressive face showed empathy with those for whom she cared. Long, thick lashes enclosed stunning blue eyes, and the mascara she used accentuated the look. Her lithe body showed the hours spent at the gym. She hadn't changed much since her teenage years. A variety of memories played out in her brain as a smile creased the corners of her mouth. "Bren?" A voice brought her out of her reverie. "Mrs. T, you startled me." "Sorry, I didn't mean to make you jump. I thought you saw me hovering." Georgina paused for a moment. "I was only checking to make sure you were still okay for Tuesday." Georgina Turnbull was the half-owner of the coffee house and had been for almost 30 years. Wrinkles framed the high chiseled cheekbones, accentuating the eyes, and displayed her 56 years. "Yes, I'm good." Bren paused and frowned. "Rachel said that you weren't working today. You could have texted instead of coming in." Georgina replied. "You know what I usually ends up as gobbledygook." She gave a small smile. Bren knew that Georgina, texting and mobile phones didn't marry well together, and smiled back. She studied the older woman's face, and uncomfortable with the scrutiny, Georgina looked away. "Well, thanks for stepping in. It's one less thing for me to worry about." Georgina nodded her head in thanks as she walked towards the counter. Bren tracked her movements and saw her speak a few words to Rachel, then make her way to the office. Bren reread the last few paragraphs of her novel and tried to immerse herself inside the heads of her characters. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Giving up, she laced her fingers together, bit her lip, and twiddled her thumbs. Rachel started clearing a nearby table. Bren nodded to the office and asked, "How is she?" "Still in shock," Rachel continued. "She's not giving herself time to grieve. I hope she doesn't bottle everything up inside her. Doing that can cause more harm than good, doesn't it, Bren?" She gave Bren a look that also said, "And I still want to know what happened in Devon for you to start stuttering. What demons are you hiding?" Bren rolled her eyes as she looked at Rachel. She gave an imperceptible shake of the head, as if warning her off. Rachel touched Bren's shoulders as she walked past to tidy a table. Unspoken words of support passed between the two. Bren said quietly, almost to herself, "When I'm ready." Rachel smiled in acknowledgement, knowing that day was unlikely to come, but she would always support her however she could. Bren continued to observe those around her casually, memorizing every tiny detail, hoping to hear a phrase that would ignite her imagination. Her focus then turned to the world outside the window. She knew she needed some inspiration to spark her creative juices and allow the written word to flow. Instead, she could feel herself becoming embroiled in a funk. She didn't want her mind to recede into the dark places of the past, so she took out her phone and scrolled through social media. But even pictures of cute cats couldn't stop the thoughts. Bren took a deep breath as she was transported back to that day 6 years ago, when she had been summoned to the headmaster's office. The words "inappropriate behaviour" rattled around in her brain. Her behaviour through school, university, and work had always been impeccable. She had never done anything that could be classed as minutely improper or wrong. A wry smile turned her lips upward as she was instantly taken back to some of the games she and her then fiancé had partaken in, which some might construe as inappropriate and unacceptable. Yet to them they were loving and natural. She could see the look of ecstasy on her fiancé's face whilst her head rocked back and her eyes rolled. She could hear the groans as her bound hands and splayed legs pulled against the silk. She could taste the beads of sweat that glistened on her brow whilst moans of delight echoed around the bedroom. Bren shook her head because almost as soon as those pleasant reflections entered her head, they were replaced by the hurt and betrayal she felt. She cursed herself, needing those unwanted notions to be hidden away, never to return. She clenched her teeth, and the anger she felt rose to the surface. She wondered if she would ever get through these feelings of failure. But what had she done wrong? Why didn't Erica believe her without question? Bren could still see the look she had been given as the words "no smoke without fire" slammed into her brain. Lies had torn down in seconds a brilliant career she was building, and she had lost everything. What hope had she when even the woman she loved had doubts? She'd always believed in the system that you were innocent until proven guilty, or charges had been dropped through lack of evidence, and yet she'd been thrown aside, a pariah, and untouchable. So with little savings, she had slunk home to her father's house, licked her wounds, and gave up on the career that was her world. She felt unloved, an outcast, not knowing how she would survive with no wage coming in. To escape the nightmare, she immersed herself in her writing, to live her life through the characters she created on the page. Bren hoped that there would come a time when she would find the courage to tell Rachel what had happened 6 years ago. But embarrassment, anger, and hopelessness overwhelmed her. She needed to unburden herself. She also knew by keeping that episode in her life hidden, she was making her insecurities worse. She couldn't find a way to let them go. She hated the stutter she had developed. People stopped treating her as an intelligent woman. Instead, strangers would try to finish her sentences or interrupt and speak for her. These negative experiences meant she clammed up and went away from her security blanket of the coffee house. Here she was known and treated with respect. Here she felt safe to be who she'd become. And after 6 years, she thought she was ready to embark on the next stage of her recovery. 6 years. 6 years of being by herself, not allowing anyone close enough to feel her pain and humiliation. 6 years of feeling a failure. The time had both dragged and also flown. She ached to make the hurt disappear, and yet during those years, Bren had carved a new life. She had written novels with minor success and become a different person, although not an individual she particularly liked. Her dad had only agreed for her to return home because he needed her help. He had suffered a stroke and had found the mundane tasks of shopping, cooking and cleaning difficult to manage. So they had come to a mutual understanding. She would stay and assist him while he recovered, in exchange for a roof over her head, providing she didn't flaunt her sexuality. However, she didn't expect to be living there 6 years later. Another coffee? Bren was jolted back to the present day by Rachel's question. Bren nodded. You were miles away. Were you thinking of your heroine's next conquest? And all the fun stuff they could get up to? Bren smiled a sad smile. Nothing as exciting as that. Erica suddenly invaded my mind, and those thoughts wandered to other places. So yes, coffee and a sticky bun would help banish those unpleasant musings. Erica, your fiancée, Erica, who you never brought home, the ex you talked about whenever I bumped into you when you were visiting. Sadness dulled her bright eyes. The very same one. And you know why I could never bring her home. Rachel, understanding, replied, Coffee and bun it is. A few minutes later, Rachel brought the order to her and touched her shoulder. Remember, I'm here if you ever need to talk. Thanks. 6 years I've been back, Bren began. And you still haven't opened up, Rachel interrupted, hating to see her friend suffering. One day, I promise. I'll hold you to that. I want to help. Rachel put her hands on Bren's shoulders, bent down and kissed her forehead. I still love you, you know. And I still love you. But we would never have worked. I know. Rachel gave a slight squeeze and walked back to the counter, picking up more empties on the way.